Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Gabriela Plešová speaking from Comenius University, Bratislava. I'm very pleased to see you joining this webinar, which is on designing simulations with using generative artificial intelligence. I work at Comenius University, Bratislava, and we are a lead institution for an international collaborative Erasmus Plus project, Universities for Healthy City, or HealthyU. And it's my pleasure to welcome my colleague Agnes Šimon, who is also working at Center for Scholarship and Teaching at Comenius University Bratislava. And Agi is going to facilitate this workshop this webinar for all of us. Please let me introduce Agi shortly at the beginning. Agi is political scientist by her disciplinary background. She earned her PhD from University of Missouri. And for the past 10 years or so, she has been working as an educational developer. Her passion is teaching, learning, and supporting other teachers, also through simulations. Agi is currently writing a book on scholarship of teaching and learning, and she's also doing research and very practical work in mentoring and coaching in higher education. Today's webinar is recorded, so you will have an opportunity to revisit the recording, and also we will share the slides. And please do not leave the webinar without leaving feedback for us. I shared feedback form through chat that can be completed in less than 5 minutes. If you leave your email, we will be gladly inviting you to other webinars and workshops as part of our project. And I would like also to acknowledge support from Erasmus Plus and funding from the European Commission. Before we start, I'd like to say that we introduced this series of webinars based on a survey of needs among academics in Slovakia. We surveyed more than 4,000 academics on what their main needs are in terms of using generative artificial intelligence. The survey was completed in March this year, and we also had about 900 doctoral students completing the survey. Unfortunately, this graph is in Slovakian language, but I can show you that the fourth most popular topic that teachers in higher education requested to learn about was using GenAI in teaching and learning, which is why we introduced specifically this webinar. Previous webinars dealt with using GenAI in research and also using specifically the tools as ChatGPT for education, and also Microsoft LM Notebook LM also in higher education. I'm now happy to invite Agi to take the lead for this workshop.
Thank you, Gabi, for the introduction, and welcome to everyone. I will start the webinar with generally an overview of what we are going to do today. But before that happens, there are two things that I would like to share with you or say to you. Is number one, that although we have a question and answer section reserved by the end of this webinar, anytime you have questions, you can raise your hand or write the question into the chat if you don't want to interrupt what's going on, although I don't necessarily mind that happening. And then I might ask you at certain points during this webinar to share your experience with us. This mostly will consist of raising your virtual hands or writing something into the chat. It is obviously voluntary, but it would give, I think, all of us a better understanding and feeling of what's going on if you contributed. And I would like to ask Gabi to help me out with reading those and then kind of making a count of how many people raised their hands. As once I'm sharing my slides, I will not be really able to check that. So with that,
I will keep one eye on the chat always. Okay.
Sounds perfect. Thank you. And then let me start actually with sharing my slides. Okay, and I would like a confirmation that you can actually see my slides. Perhaps a oral confirmation, so I'm not much saying you.
Yes,
all right, fantastic. All right. So Gabi already told you, I think, most of what is worth knowing about me. I will be revealing a little bit more of my experience during the webinar, but what we are going to do today is looking a little bit on general issues about simulations in higher education, including when to use, how to use, benefits and challenges. Some of you might be familiar with this. But I would also like to make the seminar or the webinar meaningful for those who really have not engaged with designing or thinking about simulations before, but very eager to do that in the future. And then we will move on to the second part of the seminar, which will actually connect generative AI and simulations. After a couple of very general words, we will actually look in practice how this works. I will be sharing what I'm doing with GenAI, and if you would like to, you will also have the opportunity to either do the same thing while I'm doing my thing, or after that experiment with it while we're here. And why that's useful is that some of your questions actually come when you start playing around with things. Now, of course, as I said, we have also an opportunity for asking questions at the very end. All right, now let me start with questions. So I would like actually to raise your virtual hand answering the very first question, which is, have you used the classroom simulation before as a teacher? Click on the raise hand button and okay, I do realize we have a few people raising hands. All right. If what kind of Teams showed me, it means that a few of you have. I don't have an exact count. That's probably okay. My next question, have you personally designed a classroom simulation before? Yes, raise your hand if you have. If you had your hands up, you probably have to raise it.
Agi, I see one person, Phil.
Okay. That kind of gives me actually a very good feel of what's going on. And then I can relate to you because before GenAI was possible to use as an assistant for this purpose, I kind of refrained from it, rather borrowed someone else's simulation, some of them which were published, some of them which were done by colleagues. And last but not least, did you participate in classroom simulations as a student? Again, raise your hands if you have.
I can see one hand up, and that's Maria. And for the first question, we have two people confirming.
Okay. So generally, I think it seems that people do not have an awful lot of experience with classroom simulations, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, I think I got through my undergraduate education without meeting any of those as a student. So that's good. Now, there's a couple of issues that we need to get through. What is generally thought about simulations is that this is obviously an active learning method, but generally the question that arises is that simulation also an experiential learning activity. And for that, you need to understand what experiential learning is, and why this is important is because I can kind of reveal as much as that the answer is yes, obviously, otherwise it makes no sense to ask these questions. But most importantly, most of those benefits that we will look at soon come from this very fact that simulation is an experiential learning activity. Experiential learning is a constructivist learning theory, and the gist of it is basically learning by doing. Learners actively participate in the educational process, and the learning itself happens through a cycle of questioning, reflection, analysis, and synthesis. Which is important that, and we will see that as well, that the simulation is not only what happens in the classroom when students kind of take the role of playing a historical person or a job, thinking of disciplines like legal studies or perhaps medical sciences. Knowledge is created or supported through this transformation of experience, which means going through this cycle of learning, but also what is very important here is the experience. The way that students actually engage with simulations create them a much closer experience than simply just reading about it, watching a video about it, or even others actually simulating it out. Simulations are structured form of experiential learning. So this is just one type. There are many other ways that you can do experiential learning. These are designed rather than real life experiences, quite often because we cannot provide students with the real life experiences. In some cases, for example, doctors, we could probably connect them with people, not necessarily with patients, to practice how to communicate, but it's not really practical because we would like them to have an experience first of gaining confidence and understanding the pitfalls without actually talking to a real patient. In other cases, this is outright impossible. For example, Gabi mentioned at the beginning that I'm originally trained as a political scientist. My primary focus was international relations. And so whenever we want people to learn about crisis and war, we cannot simply create a war for them to experience how it goes. See, we need to have kind of a simulated experience, which is similar in certain characteristics, at least for the purpose of what we want them to learn, but not really a full-blown crisis in world politics where missiles are flying around. So in simulation, students experience actively rather than hear or read about constraints and motivations of actions. This can be a very impressive learning experience in that sense. Simulations also dramatize the relative positions of actors involved and or challenges confronting them, which means that sometimes they are a little bit sharper than it was in real life, or a little bit more focused than it would happen in real life. But that gives a specific or a stronger learning experience given the chosen focus. Now, a very important element of experiential learning and simulations is the attached cognition and emotion going on. So basically, we learn because we learn a way of thinking about it, making decisions, considering facts, integrating actually a lot of information, and trying to use this to the best of our knowledge. Sometimes, even when we don't have enough information, we'll need to make a decision, which is very difficult to see, especially in politics, but in many other fields, if you're not especially doing this. And there's also an emotional or personal side, which cannot be neglected, because whether we're simulating a political decision-making process, legal argumentations, doctor-patient connections, or in teacher education, classroom, or other interactions, you cannot do that devoid of emotions. You will have emotions, and you will have other personal issues going on, and you have to be able to handle them and live them and understand what kind of influence those have on you, and what you actually do. Now, the next question, which often comes up in the literature, it's probably less exciting for you, is basically whether simulations or role plays are the same. And if you see my little comparison of the two, you realize that there are a lot of similarities going on, where the differences mostly is basically emphasis. So simulations represent a broad instructional approach that recreates real-world system or situations so learners can interact with it. It's focused on making the situations as realistic as possible, and usually have a decision-making aspect modeled on and structured on some sort of environment. It's primarily useful in teaching about policymaking, decision-making processes, negotiation or bargaining, whatever field that may happen. And the general wisdom is that not all simulations are role play. A most often cited example is computer simulations, which does not necessarily, or actually does not involve any roles or role plays. Role plays, on the other hand, are specific techniques where participants take on a particular role. For example, in a teacher-student relationship, in a manager-employee relationship, and then act out those interactions. Now, the focus here is on primarily perspective taking, communications, and social dynamics. It's particularly useful in teaching about human interactions. And overall, role plays always defined as simulations. Now, the literature tried to make an artificial differentiation between this, but when you actually see examples of actual simulations, it is almost impossible to distinguish whether this is just a simulation or just a role play or a combination of the two. You most likely will conclude that this is a combination of the two. So for the purpose of this webinar, we will actually consider them as one and the same thing. So when I speak about simulations, you should also include role play. Now, I made a couple of references to this already, but some of you might be here because you are curious what this offers, but wondering if this is for your disciplines. It has been and can be used in many disciplines. I listed a couple of them, but a few of them, not all of them necessarily, and there is always some ways how you could integrate it into disciplinary education. Now, I listed actually military studies first because the simulations were really used seriously first. It was military education, and it started centuries before. Obviously, again, they couldn't start a war, but they could learn tactics and strategy through simulations. Social sciences, the humanities, medical fields, legal studies, business studies, engineering, and teacher educations often use simulations. But I think that anywhere where there's some sort of human interactions, simulations are possible and feasible. All right. So why do we use these classroom simulations? How students can benefit from this, and what are the advantages associated? Generally, simulations increase students' motivation and engagement. They find it more interesting and exciting, if you will, or fun, although I would like to emphasize that the primary aim is never providing fun. If that comes into the picture, is that because of you would like to increase motivation and engagement. It's useful in enhancing acquisition and retention of knowledge, but primarily simulations are used to go one step beyond it, and do things which are kind of difficult to do other ways, but very dry for students or very abstract for students. One of those could be helping to bridge the gap between theory and practice. It basically would mean that the simulation applies a theoretical approach, which then helps students better understand the theoretical approach and its consequences for practice or action. We will actually look at, in the second part of the seminar, how to use GenAI to link theories into the simulation. Classroom simulations create a complex environment for learning, which some argue that is also a drawback, but I listed this as more or less a benefit, because this helps students understand that nothing is as simple as it seems when you read the book. It's, oh, he made the wrong decision, or that's not what should have been done. And then have that experience of what it means to have many things going on, and actually many layers of learning going on. The greatest benefits usually cited for simulations are skills development, and many kind of skills, and we primarily think here of soft skills, but many kind of things can be involved. I listed a few of them, but you may find other benefits as well. Because it involves interaction, it helps communication skills. If negotiations are involved, then obviously negotiating skill. It almost always includes either collaboration or perhaps cooperation. It helps students think critically, or actually forces them to think critically if they would like to achieve the goals that they were assigned as part of the simulation. It quite often involves problem solving, and it also helps them develop the argumentative skills. Now, one thing, again, what we often forget is that it also increased the ability to empathize. Even in social sciences, when we're probably less excited about a student empathizing with a politician, I think it cannot be disregarded. But in fields where this is basically a required element of interaction, think about doctors or nurses interacting with patients, this can provide a huge benefit. And then why actually my personal interest came in simulations, role plays, and even board games is that it humanizes the actors involved. Now, it can simply happening when you're preparing to be a doctor, and you realize that you're not only a doctor, but that you have to, and unfortunately unavoidably will engage with patients as a human being as well. But it is also important to understand that in business, in politics, those who make those decisions are real people. So it's not a computer that decides that the United States goes to war, and the quirks, the personal background, emotions, and worldviews of these people are also important. Now, despite the many benefits of simulations, there are certain challenges that we cannot ignore. And one of them is that it is time-consuming in many respects. for you as teachers, it's time consuming because of the preparation involved. And this is where GenAI can be most useful. It can significantly cut down the preparation time, but some preparation is included, or a different kind of preparations. And that kind of relates to organizational efforts, because obviously you will ask AI to design you a simulation, and you give certain parameters, but that parameters, for example, how many students show up that day in class, may change. And so you have to know how you will change things if, for example, you have significantly fewer students showing up. It is time consuming sometimes for students, because they realize that they have to prepare for these simulations. In some cases, this can be avoided, but when you are simulating certain social interactions, historical events, students need to be aware what happened in real life. So you most likely they will have to read up on these events. But it is also time consuming because it will take up a certain amount of classroom time, which some say that, oh, if I were to lecture, I could share more information. And to which I'm usually saying, yes, you would probably be able to share more information. But the question is, will your students learn more, or just will be sinking in the amount of information? Because the simulation is good at making students learn what they actually need to learn, or what the simulation focus is about. So it might not be as much, but these need to be taken into account. A danger of simulations that they oversimplify situations. And that can happen in any field. If we're, for example, having architects interact with clients, and then we always assume that the client have clear goals, it could be a problem, because clients sometimes are undecided or have not thought about certain aspect, and then the designers still need to know how to interact, how to lead the client through these moments of indecision without forcing the client, for example, into decisions that they did not intend and will then make unhappy at the end. A very important thing that students must get on board. Students usually don't see the educational benefits that I'm just talking about. What they see is probably it's not the usual thing happening in the classroom. Some will see it, or quite a few actually, as fun. I would really like to do this. But others might not be as enthusiastic. And if you have too many of this, you have a lack of commitment problem there. Or a lack of engagement problem there, because if not a significant number of the students in the classroom are willing to seriously participate, then you will not succeed in achieving your learning objectives. There's another issue which I actually ran into before, is a commitment to the role that you're assigned to play in the simulation. Now, this sounds really weird because we think, oh boy, isn't it fun to play Nikita Khrushchev or Donald Trump or a bona fide doctor when I'm already just studying to become a doctor? Yes, maybe, but imagine the situation when an African-American students are assigned a role in the simulation of the Constitutional Congress in the United States, and they have to play a slaveholder because randomly that's the role that they got. And then they have a little bit of a crisis there, because they don't really honestly want to play a slaveholder always. I actually had this issue, and then the person said that they tried to play the role, but they kind of had this emotional and moral crisis doing it. Yes, a danger is, of course, using it rather than for entertainment and learning. Two things that are necessary for you to know why you're doing this. What are the learning objectives you want to get students to attain? And then for students to have the opportunity to go beyond just simply participating in the simulation and kind of processing these experiences, in which debriefing can and is very useful. Now, it is also possible that simulations lead to unequal learning among students. It can be for a plethora of reasons. including earlier background, this predisposition to certain learning types, some people not so much accustomed to learning through lectures and memorizing notes that they suddenly find themselves not understanding what's going on in here. But overall, the majority of students will get a lot of things, and you yourself can support students who seem to be struggling with the simulation and what can be learned from it. Now, we can also think about non-native speaking students who, for example, in negotiations or simulating courtroom argumentation might be in a little bit disadvantaged. But my experience is that if they want and if they try, they will rose to the occasion. Maybe they need a little bit more encouragement, or you need to consider this aspect when you're designing the simulation. And then a generally big challenge is how to assess simulations, because if you really want them to get involved, it is not necessarily a good idea to grade what they are doing. But on the other hand, some sort of assessment, feedback, or other or a different approach to it, which I'll briefly mention in a couple of minutes, is necessary because students need to understand what went well, what didn't go well, and you need to understand how the simulation went, whether it has achieved the purposes that it was designed for. Now, all of that kind of looking through the benefits and challenges of simulations led us to what are the best practices in classroom simulation design, or rather, what are the issues that need to be considered. The learning objectives, and this is something that those who had not formal training in teaching and learning often have a little bit of a struggle with, but generally we like or it's beneficial if you think about what you would like your students to learn by the end of this simulation. Do you want them to improve their communication skills? Do you want them to link a theory with practice? Do you want them to have a increased engagement in classroom activities? Also think about the content, what you would like content-wise students to learn. And then it's important to take into account that certain learning content is not really working very well with simulation, and others work very well, but maybe an issue has several aspects, and you have to decide what is the focus of this simulation. What are we focusing in this case? Student progression and skills are important, and this is mostly come in understanding of where they are in their studies. A simulation is possible, but students in the first semester of their first year, but it probably will look different from the simulation in their final semesters, when they have a lot more knowledge about their field of study. Overall, they probably gain skills in certain areas, gain perhaps confidence, which is also a very important thing when they have to actively engage. The simulation has to be complex but not overwhelming, and this is a challenge because it's you who have to judge, and this is where understanding and kind of running the simulations and you yourself learning for the simulation. If it's not complex enough, it's probably either leading to results which is not very meaningful, or not serving your learning objectives sufficiently. But if it's overwhelming, it might lead students to not being able to or wanting to fully participate, and might actually hinder learning because they can't really understand what they are doing. An important thing is available resources. You need to know what you have what you can bring in the classroom when you run the simulations. Most of what we are going to look today is relatively resource scarce, in the sense that you have to produce a lot of files and printouts, but overall it does not require specific investments from you. Existing structures can also be a constraint. It is important whether you have a 50-minute session or a 90-minute session or 180 minutes, that can lead to a very difficult simulation design. The room may or may not be conducive to simulations. Some of the traditional lecture halls are usually more difficult to run a simulation in, but not impossible. You just have to think through of physically how students will organize themselves. Another important aspects of how many students do you have? There are simulations which you can run in with many students, but optimally these are designed for small classes, which I would say up to 25 or maybe 30 students. If you go beyond that, you should also start considering, is this a good idea to just do one group? You want to have parallel groups? Do you need a teaching assistant to help you, assistant or more than one of them to help you out? So this kind of feeds back into the resource considerations. Also, classroom facilitation is an important aspect of simulations. So it's not just that you go in, tell students what their role is, and then you just watch them. It is not impossible to do that, but eventually questions will come up and you will need to answer and settle those questions. If a simulation is kind of more exciting or have more stages, then you're actively required to be involved, in the sense of you're given prompts or impetus or kind of changing events by presenting students with new development to which they have to react. And then the most crucial aspect of every simulation is debriefing, which means basically discussing what happens in the simulation, reflecting on the experiences, and kind of making sense, linking it back to the learning objectives, to the learning content. And students has to leave the classroom, or if you postpone the debriefing from the next session, then understand in the next session of what they learned, why they did the simulation, and what kind of they benefit from it. All right, now we are through all of those generalities, and then we get to the point of when that we realized we know kind of what's the best practices for simulations, what are the pitfalls with simulations, but we never designed a simulation before. We heard that GenAI can be useful in this, but we're not entirely sure how. I kind of referred to some aspects before, but generally what GenAI is really good at is that they map simulations to learning objectives or skills level, or if you give a very vague prompt, most often GenAI actually provides you with the learning objectives that I designed the simulation around. So if you're unsatisfied, you could change those. It can process and synthesize large amount of information. And for me, this is actually the greatest advantage because when designing a simulation, there's so many aspects taken into considerations that as a human, it takes a lot of time for me to get a handle and kind of think through all of those, put those into writing, and then kind of draft and redraft. Now, in this, GenAI is really good. And it can also very easily and quickly refine or revise aspects that you don't like. Now, you can contribute your own thing to it, as we will see, but this is where I see its primary advantages. And it generates realistic scenarios quickly. It incorporates reality and complexity, which again, as a human, is kind of difficult to do. It can support adaptive and dynamic simulations in real time. This is actually an aspect that today we're not going to deal with. We're going to deal with all of those simulations that were prepared ahead of class time. But technically, it is possible to use GenAI to help you in the classroom to run the simulation. In fact, this is kind of the next logical step in my inquiries of how to use GenAI, and I'm hoping that maybe yet one day I will be able to do a seminar, a webinar, or a workshop on that as well. GenAI is particularly fantastic in supporting simulation material. Yes, can be simply the guide for you of how to run these simulations, instructions for students, but it could be also role cards in which individual students understand of what their role is and what they're supposed to do in this simulation, other than you have 45 minutes to complete these simulations, etc., etc. But it can also help you with creating rubrics for evaluating the simulations, or giving you suggestions for debriefing. Now, some of this, I would say, take it with a grain of salt. It's probably better to use GenAI on those aspects, especially debriefing and rubrics, as brainstorming rather than something definite, but this is really useful. But unfortunately, GenAI, despite all of its advantages, is not perfect. Sometimes it actually has factual errors, which is why it is argued that you should only design simulations whose content or whose historical event or social interaction, if you're training, I don't know, business persons or lawyers or doctors or nurses. So you have to be aware of all of these things and say that, oh, no, well, it's nonsense. We need to fix these. And then you can tell GenAI to fix those. But it will be you who have to spot this. In some cases, GenAI has limited conceptual understanding because it has access probably to less information, and that information is written down. Remember, it really has information to anything that's on the web. That kind of lives on and passed on in the profession through practice. It's most often not accessible to it, and it might misinterpret certain cues in a situation. It may expect or designs into the simulation unrealistic human behavior. Again, you're the best judge if this is the case. It can reproduce social, cultural, and professional biases, which I think is a problem if you want to avoid those sort of things. But I can actually imagine certain situations when that can be an advantage. So if some say racial or gender prejudice is an important aspect of the profession that you work in, or I don't know, patients on the one, male doctors or female doctors, that need to be actually included. So it's not a bad thing in that case. It may have poor pedagogical judgment or alignment. It's not a teacher. It might not really align the learning objectives well with the content that you or this event or the situation. It might not design the most practical evaluation rubric. It might forget about the learning objectives and just focuses on the content of the simulations itself. And there's one other which I also kind of uncertain whether this is really a drawback. So GenAI is inconsistent. You may give the same prompt to different models, and they will produce you different results. But even when you do the same prompt and give the same prompt to the same model, it could produce different results based on that. It could be an advantage and disadvantage. It's a disadvantage if you haven't saved what you've done before, because now you're not working to improve what happened before, but you're kind of starting again. it is a problem if for some reasons it would be important to have similar outcomes. But it is also nice because it could help you to run different simulations on the same thing and understand that one might be better than the other for that. Now, how to use GenAI for our simulation design? Usually, you need to choose a GenAI model and use it as an assistant. You need to experiment with what is best for your purposes. And that can be based on the quality of simulation as well as your personal preferences. I will probably suggest this again, but generally, two recommendations. Use a model in which you can log in and kind of save the output that GenAI produced you so that you can kind of revisit and continue working with it. And I would recommend also, if you have access to a paid version, then feel free to use it, but it is not necessary, and you have a free account, the simulations can be designed very well. Now, while GenAI will be your assistant, you remain the expert. You have to decide whether what GenAI did is good or bad or useful or unuseful or how to improve it. And for that reasons, simulate situations that you're familiar with and always check the output. So while GenAI significantly cut down your preparation time, give yourself enough time to check what it did and then improve it either yourself or ask ChatGPT with certain prompts or other models to improve it. Now, designing good prompts, and this is my constant grievance with all of these tutorials on using GenAI. What is a good prompt? Now, for me, a good prompt is that you can help you achieve what you want to achieve. You can start with very complex prompts, defining very many aspects of the teaching and learning process and the content and the situation. But you can start fairly vaguely and refine that step by step, which is actually my favorite method. And finally, as always, consider the ethical aspect and disclose the use of GenAI in your simulation. So I don't think it's a problem for students to understand that it's not your design. In fact, they might ask you, how to design one, and then what do you say? Well, I used this and this GenAI model. But I also think this is important to explain why this is different from them not being allowed to complete assignments with the help of GenAI. The most common reason is that I can check what ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot or whatever model you prefer did, and I know when there are mistakes, etc. Whereas you just learning about the topic, we don't have that luxury yet. All right, let's move toward getting more active and more involved with using GenAI. So raise your hand if you're ready to work with GenAI. All right, I'm pretty sure some of you are. Okay, some hands did go up. All right. Now, please use the chat and feel free to keep putting up your hands. It's always slower than the facilitator would expect. But I'm glad to see that people are reactive and ready. What type of GenAI model do you usually use? If you want to kind of play with it today, feel free to log in or pull up the model if you don't log in normally and use it. But please write into the chat, what is your preferred GenAI model? All right.
I'm sorry, chat is unavailable.
In that case, you might just simply can share with us your favorite GenAI in words. So a couple of you, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's locked to our institution, probably.
Yeah, just team members or something like that.
Yeah.
So what is your favorite?
I use mostly ChatGPT or Gemini. Gemini.
Others?
I am using Grok.
I'm also using ChatGPT and Gemini.
Well, I am also trying Notebook LM, especially as a instruction of the last webinar, and ChatGPT.
Okay.
I use ChatGPT and Copilot and sometimes Gemini.
I use Copilot.
Right, that's actually, I think, gives us a kind of nice variation in our GenAI models. My personal preferences go to either ChatGPT or lately I started to experimenting with Claude. So what I will do today, I will use primarily ChatGPT, and if we have time, and probably looking at the clock we will, I will also show you a couple of things in Claude, and that will give us an opportunity to see the differences that the two models produce, which in itself can be interesting. All right, raise your hand if you're using the free version of your GenAI models. Okay, and
4 hands up so far.
Okay.
5.
Right, and as I said before, it's perfectly fine. You do not need to pay for it. If you have access to a paid version, it's probably useful to use that option. But the simulations that you design with the free version is perfectly functional and useful. Okay. Now, currently, are you logged in at the model's website that you usually use or perhaps plan to use during today's seminar? If yes, please raise your hand. Fantastic. Okay. So I did put together a little bit of where do I start using GenAI. This probably will be more useful after this webinar when you kind of want to revisit of what did we do. If you decide to also actively use a model during this webinar, that also, and you're using, you logged into the model, then you can see it and then kind of revisit in the future. So now what I would like to do is actually stop sharing because I think I shared my screen, not my window, and then move on to my GenAI and then reshare the screen, or rather probably the window. Okay. So now what you should see is my browser with ChatGPT. If that's not what you see, please let me know.
It's okay, Agi.
Sounds good. Thank you. And then, so I recommend that we take the approach that I prefer. And then if you want, you can experiment with a more or a different approach. But my preferred approach, as I mentioned before, is starting fairly vague. Now, because I would need to, or it is advised, oops, sorry, something went wrong in here. So because this is advised that you use something that you're familiar with, and so you can actually check whether what's being done is correct and it's what you want. I had two options, either to focus on political science or teacher education, and I decided I will go with political science, partly because my original interest in all of these experiential learning methods came from political science, but also this is probably closer to what most people do, and rather than teacher education, although some of you might actually are involved with that specifically. Now, having said that, what I will create a simulation about is going to be the Cuban Missile Crisis, in some word, or in some part of the world, also known as the Crisis of October 1962. This is the event when the Soviet side placed missiles in Cuba, which led to a certain day of the world standing still because the United States reacted to it rather strongly and demanded that those missiles are being removed. Remember, if you lived then, it was the height of the Cold War. If you didn't, I'm sure you learned about the Cold War in your studies. Now, the advantage of this as well, that this is a simulation I ran before, but not designed by ChatGPT, but by a colleague. So I also have some experience with what the simulation can do and how it looks. So that gives me an extra advantage. And this is a fairly simple simulation, even if you're not a historian or a political scientist, to understand what's going on. So the first thing I do, I give my relatively general prompt to ChatGPT. And what I prepared it so that I don't have to spend an awful lot of typing while we're sitting here. And that reminds me, anytime that you think I'm going too quick, please feel free to speak up and tell us that, oh, sorry, can you go a little slower? Can you actually show that again? I'll be happy to do that. So what I want ChatGPT to do is to design a classroom simulation about the Cuban Missile Crisis for third-year undergraduate students in a course on foreign policy analysis, which basically said that these students are kind of progressed in their studies. What is this specific class that they are taking, which also kind of influences of how much they know or what kind of simulations are appropriate for them. And the third year also helps understanding that these students have some background in this field. Now, this is vague because I said nothing about learning objectives, nothing about the number of students, nothing about the length of the class. But let's see what ChatGPT produces us. And now, it is actually fairly quick in this, but you need a little bit of patience for things to come out. And then let's wait until it produces the result, because that also gives us kind of an interesting thing to see of what it produces. An interesting thing is actually that you remember I did not specify anything about class size or what I'm usually teaching, or actually I specified the class or the course, but also not the number of students. But if you keep designing simulations and you log into the model will have a little bit of an experience of what you usually want from it. And if you don't specify this thing, these were kind of plunged in. Now, what did I ended up? So what it does, it says, by the end of the simulation, students should be able to apply key foreign policy analysis models, it names the models, and then evaluate how leaders like John F. Kennedy, Nikita Khrushchev navigated with incomplete information, which is always the case. You don't always know everything that you would like to know to make a decision. Understand escalation dynamics, signaling, and misperceptions. Reflect on the role of domestic politics and advisory systems. Now, this is an awful lot of things going on, and all of these can be relevant. But personally, I would really not really interested in those things. So I will ask it to at least recreate some of the issues and simply focus on skills. It says very little
Ali,
about.
excuse me, I can
Mhm.
see still one hand up, which is
Mhm.
Fatima. So let's check if Fatima has a question.
Please.
I'm sorry. I didn't see my my
Okay.
hand.
That's okay, Fatima.
Okay, but see, if you put up your hand, you can ask your question. So thanks, Gabi, for noticing that. So what I would like it to focus on a little bit more on negotiating and communication skills. So we will prompt it shortly to do that. But let's see what other things happen in this classroom, okay? It says it's designed for 1 or 2 class sessions, 19 to 180 minutes total. Yeah, no, I don't really think I have that much time, so I will ask it to redesign with 50 minutes. But then it's given you a, which means that it kind of goes very well with my learning objectives, because at this point, I would like to do a little bit less on the theoretical side and more on the skills development side, which could help taking out certain aspects of the simulation. Now, so I have only 15 minutes for 50 minutes for this class, so we need to figure out what we can do in that one. Students, it's 50 to 40 students. Yeah, I'm not really having 40 students, so I will restrict it to, let's say 25 students. That's and not a terribly bad seminar size. And then students are divided into decision-making teams representing key actors, which sounds fine. Now, what then you see is basically the roles, that the groups in the roles that students will take up. These are very, very interesting. And so it basically created you those 3 sides, the United States and the Soviet Union as the main actor, and Cuba, who is part of this deal, but usually takes a very small and background role. But this looks fine, and it offers then to me that I cannot United Nations delegations. In fact, if you wanted, you can also add the aspects of United Nations Security Council negotiations, but I'm not interested. You can add into NATO allies, yeah, not too much complication. I don't think that is going to work. You can also add the media, public opinion aspects, and probably if you're training in this sort of fields, or you want people to be more aware of how to deal with the media, you would add these. But I'm really interested in foreign policy decision making, so I'm going to skip these. And then what it does not only tell you of what are the main sides and the main actors within that, but also of what phases this simulation will take. Obviously, I already know that probably I can do all of these phases, or it has to be significantly shortened if I want less class time devoted to it. But it gives you a very good understanding of what kind of policy options the groups have, what you should be in general doing, what sort of messages the actors should receive and kind of react to. And so this looks really impressive in some sense. Where I'm having, let's move through this. And then it gives you ideas for debriefing, which is, as ChatGPT says, a critical component. It lists you possible questions for prompts. And then if you want specifically to tie it into groupthink, you could click on these links and see how that goes. But before that happens, the third thing is to decide whether this is really questions that it makes sense to you. If you learned about rational decision making, this is a really good topic to discuss. If you learned about, and your students learn about, organizational, bureaucratic politics and prescience, these are good questions. But if you add a different learning objective or a different content focus or in different aspect of this event that was important, that you might not want to use these. In that case, you can also ask your GenAI model to come up with new questions specifying of what you're looking for. And it gives you general tips. Some of these tips, some of this should be fairly straightforward. If you had all of that information that we covered at the beginning of this webinar. Some of this makes a lot of sense, but only if this is what you want. So, for example, making unrealistic decisions and moves probably should be penalized in some ways, or at least pointed out in the debriefing that this is not possible. Unrealistic also have kind of different meaning, because the simulations that I ran never aimed at producing the same outcome that was produced in real life. In some fields, it could be important to produce an outcome which is very close to real life, not identical anyways, but there are many ways to talk to patients empathically, but the outcome should always be empathic communication with the patients. In fact, anytime I read a simulations, and I did about a dozen times on the Cuban Missile Crisis, the results never matched what was achieved in real life, even it never came close to, and no classroom achieved the same outcome. So these were all, they were all different shades. In fact, in some cases, it was a nuclear war, which is not ideal, but it does teach a lesson, and that is that the decision or the outcome was not predetermined. A lot depends on how people act, how people perceive situations. And so in that case, the outcome of this event or many other events was one unique thing which may not be reproduced, may be reproduced, but most likely no. And that is, I think, is an important lesson, for example, in history or in political science. Now, it also offers you an optional assessment method, and that would be asking the students to write a short reflection, exploring the question of which FPA model best explains your group's behavior and why. This is not bad, but does it fit your purposes? I actually like reflective assignments, and I think they help students to learn a lot. And if you are, as in this case, third-year students, they should and learned about the model before and went through the simulation, they should be able to do this. But for example, I used once board games to simulate decision-making processes. In that case, the event itself was less important. My focus was the experience, the emotions, the personal aspect. So I asked them to reflect, but they didn't need to connect any models with anything in that reflection. Just pretty much say that, oh, and this is one student did, I had a terrible headache that day. And then I was like, oh, wonderful, because we will use all of these materials. I will read it through. I collect a bunch of the ideas coming out of this with anonymously, obviously. And then we'll go through, and in the classroom, we will tie it to various foreign policy models. So I kind of use it as a case study. But for the time being, let's leave the assessment aspect and let's go back to where we would like to improve our simulations. And one of the aspects, although not the first one, first I just would like to do a little bit of the criteria that we talked about, the learning objectives, the length, and the number of students kind of taken into account, is that these are very unspecific things if you think about it. Yes, there's a president modeled in Kennedy, there's a Secretary of Defense, there's the CIA director, there's the Joint Chief of Staff representing the military, but there are very general goals for the entirety of this group, And so students don't really know that if I'm the CIA director, what am I supposed to do in this simulation? Okay? So in the next step, after we kind of fix the parameters, I will also ask ChatGPT to more concrete role descriptions. And how would that go? Okay, so let's first ask them to modify the simulation, taking into the different characteristics of my classroom into account. So redesign the simulation for 25 students. And 15 minute class sessions, focusing on negotiating, collaborative, and maybe not to comprehension, communication. Now, if you want, you can specify all of this at the beginning, and then it does not require a redesign, but then you kind of already excluded yourself to see what ChatGPT thought for the first time. I also want a little bit less on the theoretical side. So I will say, let's see what the learning objectives are, that do not worry about theoretical approaches. You can say do not link the simulation to theoretical approaches. We'll do that separately. Let's see what comes out of here. Yes. All right. So, right, it redesigned the simulations, taking into account all of these issues that I asked it to consider. It did not produce me a separate list of learning objectives, but like pretty much in defining that negotiations, collaboration, communications should be emphasized and these skills incorporated, I kind of defined what the learning objectives are. Now, if you want, you can ask ChatGPT to, or whatever model you use, to spell out these learning objectives separately, but no, I'm content for the moment. I'm more worried about the content of my simulation. So this gives me a little bit of an organizational help. So how many students will do what? I already know that I'm not sure I really wanted a United Nations team, but it kind of makes sense if you think about it. If you have 25 students and you don't want incredibly large groups, and having a media team which remembers a lot of what's going on depends on how you also present information for the public and how that is perceived by your opponent. And then it gives you the timeline. You will spend about 5 minutes with setup, allowing 5 to 15 minutes with internal strategy, assigning not really assigning roles within groups, or you can skip this phase, or you can actually determine yourself who will do what, but students might negotiate out if you're focusing on negotiations. Anyways, then you can open a negotiation phase, and then these are the rules and constraints, what's going on, and then it also tells you that at 2 points you can actually add in information that will redirect the discussion into which participants can react. And then students need to arrive at a final decisions, which includes a final position. It might not be submitted on paper, but it might be submitted on paper. It might be presented in, I don't know, shortly. Or if any agreement was made between the party, and then you basically determine how it went. And if you want, you can reflect on this. Now, it also offers a very rapid debrief, which is logical because I have a very short class. And more or less of what happens in this simulation and with the learning objectives, it's okay. I'm not sure I would really want to bother about alliances, particularly the NATO allies are not part of this simulation. And then Cuba and the Soviet Union can perhaps act out as allies, but this is not really a major focus. I would probably ask them a little bit about how difficult it was, for example, to understand the perspective of the other side, which is, again, important if you want to achieve some sort of cooperative results. Now, so it gives you how to design roles, but it doesn't really design you the roles. It gives you an example for you. It gives you a couple of tips for you how to succeed in these simulations. And then I kind of find it cute, but why this simulation works kind of tells you a bit of a different information of what it thought it would be worth considering. Now, the fantastic thing is that it also offers you to draft exact one-page roll sheets and printable event cards, which is fantastic because coming up with the structure of the simulation is probably not terribly difficult to say that there will be 5 or 3 parties in this simulation, but then defining the role of each actor is kind of hard. So let's see what it does when you click on this. And if it doesn't offer, you can just prompt it to do it. And then now you have things more spelled out. Let's look at the US side, which is tells you, right, you're the leader, you're the president, you're John F. Kennedy. These are your goals. These things that you cannot do. Okay, so, but partly these are also goals because you cannot accept missiles remaining in Cuba. It's a constraint in the sense that this is not an option in the negotiations. You might have a secret compromise. It's very cute regarding the what actually happened in real life. So you would be happy with a quiet compromise so long you achieve your objectives. It does not need to be published or publicized. And then it also gives you a couple of other team roles, but I'm like, there's no detailed information for these. So probably I would want to prompt ChatGPT to write those up. Again, in the other, in the Soviet Union, whoever will play Nikita Khrushchev now has very clear objective constraints and priorities, but we don't know anything about these people. And then Cuba, you have Fidel Castro, and we don't know anything in the other roles, but I would say, for example, that we need a couple of other people, right, to participate in Cuba, but they probably will have relatively limited roles. And then there's a United Nations teams who is not the Security Council. It's mainly a team of UN officials who want to prevent a nuclear war. So it's not for a single person, it's for the entire team. And then what kind of roles people can play within that team, the Secretary General, mediators, crisis code, etc., etc. Okay, and then there's a media team, which again, from my perspective, it kind of makes no sense because you could, of course, cover these events as part of the media, but I think unless you're focusing on, say, the education of journalists, this is a little bit less of a priority in a foreign policy class. So the next thing which you see are event cards. It's basically our events that happened and will happen during this simulation. You don't have to select all of those. You can select just a few of them, and to which the different teams have to respond. It is more detailed than what we've seen before. Now, right, you don't need all cards, it says to me. Now, format these cards into printable layout. You can do that, and then that perhaps speeds up things. You can easily print these. Add grading rubrics, okay? So you can add grading rubrics. But my problem with this is that I do not want in the simulations, neither the UN nor the media. So the obvious next step would be excluding those. I would also like role descriptions for other roles than the leaders. So you can do that, and I actually will do this. But from this point of view, I think you kind of understand how to manipulate aspects of a simulation. Now, this will be different if you're content-wise, or the aspects that you consider if you're trying to simulate a patient-doctor relationship, business negotiations, legal argumentation. But again, legal argumentation itself can include a lot of things depending on what sort of court it happens, etc., etc. And so how to manipulate these to achieve those results. And in some cases, and I'm thinking particularly the debriefing here, you should possibly be the one who use these prompts and kind of takes it where you would like it to take. Maybe ChatGPT suggests these things, but you already set your course assessment criteria. So you can add another reflection paper to write, but because it's not compulsory, I don't know if anyone will write it. So think about it. Is this the most practical thing for me to do? So to kind of finish up with these basic things, I will instruct ChatGPT to those things that I just mentioned, but then we will look at it and it kind of will leave at that, but we will ask also to add the grading rubric. So I asked it to redesign the simulation using the same parameters. Expect have only 3 sides. United States, Soviet Union, and Cuba, and provide role descriptions for all roles. And now it helps you, right? You now the president knows what it does. It's not as detailed as before, but the advantage is that now the Attorney General, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff have some understanding. You can keep asking ChatGPT to refine these things, but we will not do this because I would like you to experience other things as well. Now, then it has same thing worked out for so Soviet Union, for Cuba, and then there are some shared rules which everyone needs to understand and are usual event cards, and then explanation why it works. No, you can ask if you want for learning objectives. No, you can ask for all of these extra things, instructor scripts. In fact, when I was preparing for this webinar, I asked ChatGPT to write a short summary of the Cuban Missile Crisis that students can use for preparations. And with sufficient instruction, it can do that too. But you, again, have to read it because you know what your students know and what the students don't know, or what they need to know for a meaningful simulation. You can also ask it to provide some material to be assigned. But I'm not sure. In my syllabus, I says that 10% of the final grade is coming from this simulation, but I need to evaluate this simulation some ways. And so let's see if I can use a useful rubric, and whether what ChatGPT does is helpful for that purposes. Okay, so sign a rubric for the evaluation of this simulation. While ChatGPT works on it, I can also tell you that I asked to kind of attach a real-life person's name to each of the roles that students play. And it's a lot more fun to say that I play the Joint Chief of Staff, who was actually General Curtis LeMay, and kind of having a face on it. It's cute, okay? So this is what I've got. How clearly and strategically did the student communicate, negotiations and problem solving, how well did the student engage in negotiations and work toward agreements. Well, this sort of looks really cool, but I'm not entirely sure how I can judge
excuse
this.
Me, we have Lenka raising her hand.
Okay, let me finish the sentence and then she can go ahead. So I'm not entirely sure how I would be able to make this evaluation for 25 students simultaneously. Okay, so this might not be something you want. You might want to return to the idea of a reflective paper. Lenka, please go ahead with your question.
Sorry, did I interrupt it?
No,
but I'm really reflecting and struggling from my experience with these evaluation issues. And the simulation is a group exercise. Yes, am I right? So even you have a certain criteria, the ones that we just see right now, and break down in several points. It still seems to me that it's extremely general or can be very subjective, even to evaluate the whole group. And even if we manage with that, then it can cause some group conflict if some individuals hasn't participated equally, or if I want to divide the assessment in two parts, group one and individual, then what would be your advice? How to do that, and how to really be fair, even having these rubrics would be extremely as I am facing these issues very often, would be quite subjective base, or having maybe not really fair approach to everyone.
I perfectly
Sorry
get
for
your
interruption.
no, I perfectly get your point, and I think these are all very relevant, and not just in the simulation, but in assessment practices overall. That's why my preferred evaluation would either be not putting a grade on the simulation unless the objective was really to generate a grade. I don't see why that would be an objective. And yes, there will be students who contribute less, and there will be students who contribute more. And students are perfectly right to complain about those who contributed less. But if you're not, okay, I see two options. You're not grading the actual simulation performance. And normally you can make some motivations or incentives for them to actually participate. But I generally told them that once you've done this simulation, you will need to write, say, a paper reflecting on these and these aspects, or you will, if that was the objective, you need to link your experiences to a certain theory, which kind of incentivize more people to participate. And I still didn't necessarily need it to grade what they did in part of the simulation. Often they are very carried away and do a very good job with the simulation. So one option is not grading the simulation itself, but actually generating some assessment material based on the simulation. And if you hear some terrible noises, it's because my computer had a bad fan, but I'll try to make that go away. Okay, and then alternatively, you can set up the simulations in which each participant has a set of clear goals to achieve, and then you grade them or assess them. Grade them, I'm not really wanting, again, to suggest that you put a grade on it, but assess them on how much they achieved those goals, and probably hold a debriefing on why they think they couldn't reach what they did, what they think they could have done otherwise, etc., etc. So turning this more into a learning experience rather than an exercise or an assignment to be graded. So it's more or less a setup. In fact, so with the Cuban Missile Crisis simulations I used previously, without I discovered ChatGPT, each team had objectives, and the winner was, well, there was no winner if there was a nuclear war because everyone died. But each group's kind of was evaluated if they reached those goals, and the winner of the simulation was whoever achieved their goals most closely, and so there was a scoring system, etc. But I did not grade them on it because there's a lot of other things going on. They might do their best, but a negotiation depends on all the negotiating parties. It's something you have to decide of, again, what's your learning objectives for the students and what your objectives within the class with this simulation. I don't think I hold the holy grail of telling you of best grading of the simulation. I would more specifically ask them to probably reflect on things, and so learn it that way, or having a discussion in which we as a group reflect. All right, if there are other questions, feel free to raise your hand, and then we get to cover those. But what I would like a little bit, probably we don't have as much time to go with as much detail, but I would like quickly to look at what Claude as a different Gen AI model can offer to you. And what I will do, I will start it with the very same prompt, so we have some basis of comparison. Because I don't expect it to do the exact same thing, you might not continue the same way as before. So, but all of those steps of grading through, understanding what it offered to you, what the purpose that you're using it, whether it fits those purposes, etc., are the same. Now, one thing that you can generally see that Claude is much slower in generating an output. So it has, even it allows you to get notified if it has the output. It might be a good thing, it might be a bad thing. Depends on what you end up with. Okay. Okay, so some of you see it's also planned longer simulation with 3 delegates. 5 simulation rounds, etc. It did include a couple of these foreign policy models, which is good, but probably including all of them would be a pain and probably too much for students really learn what's going on in here. It does offer you pre-required pre-readings for the session, maybe more than I can reasonably expect undergraduate students to read, but let's skip those. It basically 5 chapters or so to get through, so it's maybe too much. It gives you instructions of how you want to proceed with the setup. And it already gives other possible instructions, as in each team should prepare position memos. Like the previous ChatGPT said nothing about position memos and those sort of things. These can be actually very useful in assuring that preparation was done. If they submit it before the course and you have a realistic time to give feedback on it, kind of understanding if they're following what they are required to do. Yeah, we're not going to upgrade now. It actually came up with a much limited thing. And then amount of free messages until 5 p.m., which is another thing. Partly because I already used this this morning to tinker around, but it also offers you to generate a couple of things which you can do, but you will also have to take into account when you're using your model what restrictions these models have, right? Claude free version has more restrictions, unless you probably want to figure out if it gives you more with a different or a less sophisticated model. We're not going to do this. A good lesson also is that, and which will be the next thing which we will do, is seeing how many documents it allows you to upload. ChatGPT generally have, I think, a limit of 3 documents within perhaps 48 hours. So if you want to do a lot of tinkering, that's not, you have to build in that you may need to wait until you can upload something again. Claude is more permissive in that, but in the free version, it gets you less messages. So that's another lesson to learn, is that be familiar what your model can do. And if your model can do, you might want to search out another one to do to plan the simulation or just help out planning your simulation. All right. Let's do one more. Let's see how this uploading things and including something in a document goes. And then I will open the floor for further questions. Okay, so we had this wonderful simulation that ChatGPT said, but I said, okay, well, this is fine, but I really just want it to focus on a single theory or model of foreign policy decision-making and build that into the simulation. No, what I can do is I can just generally prompt to do it, which is pretty easy, and it may result in very good, it may result in very good output if this is something very commonly used, which most of those foreign policy decision makers are. So in this case, I do not need to upload anything, but basically just tell it that design a new classroom simulation about the Cuban Missile Crisis based on Graham Allison's model of bureaucratic politics for the same course as above. You can also said basically with the same parameters as above, and then probably you don't have to load the number of students, etc., etc. But then here you're relying on whatever this information ChatGPT finds about this model. And so mostly it's decent. My previous experience with running this, that it does very well. One complaint I had is that while bureaucratic politics definitely happens in the Soviet Union or in Cuba, I would perhaps suggest or ask ChatGPT to recreate just focusing on the United States, because the model was originally developed to democratic countries, particularly in presidential systems. So it might not be working very well with the Soviet Union, but it could be one lesson of the simulation that it didn't work very well, because not matter what we did, Nikita Khrushchev just did whatever he wanted to do, which is an overstatement, but it's possible. Now, alternatively, what I can say is design a new classroom simulation about the Cuban Missile Crisis based on the attached theoretical aspect for the same, let's say, with the same parameters. We will exclude bureaucratic politics because in the preceding model, we asked it to do it and we don't want to mix things up. We can add a document, and if it likes me, it doesn't like me today, but doesn't matter. So you can actually add the document, which I could do earlier today, but it doesn't really want me to do it now. And again, you can run into these sort of things. Not to panic, what I would need probably to do is to wait a little bit and then upload it. But basically, if I do this, let's see if it actually asks for the document. Yeah, I'm missing the document. I'm missing that document too, to be honest. But you can tinker around with it and then upload it later when it actually allows you to upload it. It will, I can tell you, it will read that document and it will apply to the model. And again, you still have to figure out how to tinker with it.
Agi, excuse me, I can see an icon that you could click on and upload a document. If you go about
maybe this one
over there, yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
And yeah, no, a copy link, LinkedIn, Reddit. So I'm not sure this is going to work itself out, unless you have a link where this is where the document is. And I could have, if I put it somewhere where it is, I can create a link. But these are things that you can run into and you can figure out how to overcome. Now, if Claude didn't put that nice restrictions on me, Claude is actually more forgiving. And it would more likely to add files or photos. I can add files or photos, but it doesn't really want me to get a free message. But you just upload it and it will read the file and it will create the simulation. So that's a nice shortcut in case of simulations where you want it to restrict the simulation, that theory, and only those issues that are in that particular article, because some theories had further developed models done by the same person or another person, and you might want not to include it. Or it might be a theory that is fairly new or not very often used. So ChatGPT can probably find very little information about it. Or maybe it's something you came up recently, have not published yet, but you would like ChatGPT to include it in your simulation. All right, I think it is time for people to ask questions, or if someone wants to share with us, I think I stopped sharing. And if someone has the experience of running the simulation parallel to mine, that could be also welcome if you would want to share your experience, especially if you use a different GenAI, or if you would want to share with us of what field or content or topic you think of, simulating or applying what you learned today, that would be cool too. So questions or comments and feedback or whatever you would like to share with us. Lenko has a question. Please go ahead.
One more question. This kind of learning form, would you, Agi, recommend for students or for a class that already went through some theory? I mean, maybe at the end of the semester, not at the beginning. I mean, from your experience, do students need, or would they take more takeaways from the simulation if they are having the simulation exercise at the end of semester after having already some fundamental, not only theoretical base, but also any exercises before? Thank you.
So this is a very good question again. I actually did both. And I cannot say that one works better than the other, but they work differently. So you can use simulations as a case study. So students do the simulation, and then you teach about theory, basically. And then you can say, remember when you wrote in your reflection papers that, remember when during the simulation you had this standstill, remember when you really wanted to reach this goal, and then you know that the good decision is this, but you could not let that happen because of constraints of, I don't know, leaving a free word, and you can't really tolerate missiles in Cuba. So you can then refer back to it, and students have a much better or a very good thing to refer to, because if I normally just refer to, even if we read and maybe watch a video about the Cuban Missile Crisis, they feel much better about it when they had an experience, and so whatever they learn after, they can relate it to. Now, it works the other way around. And then you can have them learn about these theories first, and then kind of have the simulation and make them link themselves these to the theory. I think both work fine if the simulation is well done. So I would recommend see what serves your purposes best, and then do that. And then you keep hearing that what I'm saying today, a lot of this sounds, it depends. Whatever your purpose is, your learning objectives, etc. Unfortunately, it depends. And this is why when you see the slides from today, there will be very little about what you do, because a lot of what you do is you're doing it on the fly. And that's why your expertise is necessary. So if you know what you're doing topically, and then know you probably have the confidence to interrogate your GenAI model, then you will do very well.
Right, but also I noticed from your presentation and how you really focus on the structure of the simulation, that there is a important preparatory phase. That's definitely important. But then in the class is very also important the facilitation phase of the teacher. Well, I think probably this is something maybe that I was missing, so I'm giving already a feedback. Because we are finishing at 3:00. Okay, I can really prepare excellent simulation with all these role plays and everything, but then to facilitate such a exercise, such a a learning session, can be really challenging for a teacher. So probably what is your from experience, what are some tips and advices or some, really key 3 points that really teacher in the facilitation should be prepared for, or not to really be so stressful? Thank you.
So again, we focus primarily on design, but yes, you make again a very good point. Facilitation is crucial in the classroom, and so what it means that a lot depends on your own confidence. People who are more confident in the ability to manage it, don't worry about it. I did worry about it a lot, to be honest, when I started doing it. But what helped is preparing. So ChatGPT spits out all of these roles and goals and stuff. You need to read them through carefully and see and kind of play the mental game of what could happen, what could go wrong, what are likely, events happening. So what happens if nuclear war starts in the 10th minute of the simulation and the simulation is over? Is that allowable? But my uncertainties came from the fact that the simulation that I used was designed by a colleague, and I actually gave this feedback to the colleague that so when you designed it, you had certain things in mind of what you will be doing in your classroom, but I'm not aware of those things. So everything that I did, I just reacted to the situation. But if you know the topic well enough, I think you can do that. It's just important that you, when you make those decisions in the classroom, you understand what the consequence will be. So sometimes I actually kind of put extra time pressure on them because nothing seems to be happening, or everyone feels very comfortable just arguing and no time. And then you can, ChatGPT creates you these event cards, but you can come up with your own, events, or have one of these event cards ready when these things happen. Or whenever questions arise, and there will be always questions of, can we do this? Can we do that? In the simulations I've read, it was not possible for the United States to talk to Cuba because Cuba did not have, and the United States did not have diplomatic relations. So the only way it could talk to Cuba is through the Soviet Union, which is impossible, basically. And so obviously there was a need and demand for the students and say, I do want to talk to Cuba. And so you can't talk to Cuba. And sometimes they are very creative and come up with things that you did not anticipate at all. And I'm happy with those things. But occasionally there's a lot of split decisions that you need to make. And I'm not sure what's the best advice for them, but I think the easiest thing to say is be confident and then kind of go with the decision you made. You can go back and backtrack. Sorry, 10 minutes ago, I should have said that. You said that, it happened. You go on. But sufficient preparation, expertise in the subject, and a bit of confidence can take you a long time. And if you tell me that I'm not very confident, then I say what I usually tell to people, that maybe your first active learning exercise should not be a full-fledged simulation, but maybe simply a role play or something easier that you have more control over. And then as your experience goes, your confidence will grow, and then there it goes, your simulation.
We are slowly approaching the end of this webinar. Is there any outstanding question? If you don't have any questions right now, please feel free to email Agi. Agi, you can perhaps put your email to chat. And I would like to ask you all if you can spend just 3 minutes in leaving us your feedback to this webinar by completing the form in the chat. Last but not least, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. If you would like to attend our next webinar, this will be on assessment in the era of generative artificial intelligence. Again, it will be facilitated by Agi. So you are welcome to join us in 1 week, again on Wednesday, 1 p.m. I can see Denisa raised her hand. So Denisa, feel free to ask or comment.
I just wanted to say that I don't have the access to chat.
We will post my slides, and my email will be in the slides as well. But I don't know how to overcome the problem of the webinar feedback form being in the chat.
I should be able to download the participant list, which I was not able so far, but I'm hoping that, again, as in the past webinars, I will be able to do this. So I will share the feedback form with you that way. I already shared the website for HealthyU project, and this is Faculty of Arts Comenius University website /HealthyU. On that website, you find a section educational activities, and on that section, we always post all slides, recordings from our webinars, abstracts for the webinars. So you should be able to see it yourself. I think I can show it to you quickly. Oh, sorry, this is something different. I can share here. This is the project website. You can use either English or Slovak version, and work package 2, it describes what we do in terms of teaching and learning. And here, because Denisa is Slovakian, we have educational activities section, which describes all webinars that we hold approximately every second week. And here is the English language website, also with the abstract for this webinar. I will put here the webinar recording, which I will receive sometimes tomorrow, and also the slides. So thanks everyone for being with us today. Thank you, Agi, for facilitating this webinar, and I look forward to seeing at least some of you also next week, and also for our coming seminars, webinars until the end of June this year.
Thank you.
Thank you.